The mid-19th century American frontier was a tough and unforgiving landscape. While settlers toiled to establish new lives, the constant threat of Comanche raids was at large. These attacks, often launched under the cover of darkness during the Comanche moon, a period of full moon, were swift, brutal, and created a deep sense of terror in frontier communities. A lot has experienced and survived such attacks. Through first-hand accounts and historical analysis, light has been shed on the Comanche raiding tactics, the brutality inflicted on settlers, and the desperate measures taken for survival. Examining these historical events provides a deeper understanding of a defining aspect of life on the American frontier. There was constant fear and resilience required to build a life amidst the ever-present threat of Comanche raids, carving a distinct path across the southern plains. The Comanche people emerged from the Shoshone tribe in the 18th century. Unlike their neighbors who built permanent settlements and tilled the land, the Comanche thrived on a life defined by constant movement. This mobility, coupled with a fierce warrior culture, made them a dangerous presence on the frontier. The arrival of the horse in the 17th century marked a turning point for the Comanche. They embraced the animal with remarkable speed, transforming themselves into masters of horsemanship. This newfound mobility not only revolutionized their bison hunting, allowing them to follow the herds with greater ease, but also laid the groundwork for their signature raiding tactics. Mounted warriors, known for their lightning-fast strikes and ruthless efficiency, became a symbol of fear to the isolated frontier residents. The very way of life that made the Comanche such formidable warriors on the plains was also thrown into jeopardy with the arrival of European settlers in the mid-19th century. For generations, the Comanche thrived on the vast plains, their nomadic lifestyle existing in a delicate balance with the roaming bison herd. However, the relentless expansion of settlements encroached upon traditional Comanche hunting grounds, disrupting the buffalo populations that were the lifeblood of their society. This competition for resources fueled tensions, transforming the once unpopulated plains into a contested landscape. While the Comanche initially resisted permanent settlement, they did engage in trade with Europeans, acquiring new tools and weapons. This interaction likely helped progress their hunting practices, potentially leading to a shift towards horses as a more readily available resource. This period also saw an increase in raids on settlements as the Comanches sought to secure resources and reaffirm their dominance on the plains. The once symbiotic relationship between the Comanche and their environment was replaced by a struggle for survival, fostering a climate of fear and hostility on the frontier. The Comanche raids, a constant act of terror on horseback, were more than random acts of violence. They were in a desperate fight for survival, due to the changing world and fierce warrior tradition around them. With the arrival of settlers, their hunting grounds dwindled. Raids became a desperate attempt to reclaim what was theirs, a ferocious defense against a vanishing world. Survivors of Comanche raids often tell deep and emotional tales. In 1836, 9-year-old Cynthia Anne Parker's world shattered. A terrifying Comanche raid descended upon Fort Parker, the screams and gunfire echoing throughout the camp. Holding on to her family for comfort, Cynthia Anne watched in horror as her uncle, Benjamin Parker, emerged from the fort in a desperate attempt to reason with the warriors. Despite arguments to stay inside the safety of the walls, Benjamin's bravery led him out to face the mounted raiders. But negotiations turned deadly as the Comanche warriors surrounded him. Young Cynthia Anne, powerless to intervene, witnessed her uncle fall victim to their arrows, torn from her loved ones in the ensuing fight. Cynthia Anne was taken captive by the Comanche. The years that followed were a brutal fate. Separated from her family and the life she knew, she faced beatings, harsh labor, and the heartbreaking loss of a child born in captivity. Yet Cynthia Anne endured. Over time, She adapted to the Comanche way of life, even earning a degree of respect from some within the tribe. Years later, fate intervened again. Cynthia Anne was sold to a trader and eventually reunited with her kin. However, returning to a life she barely remembered proved difficult. The horrors of the raid and the years spent with the Comanche had left an indelible mark. Cynthia Anne longed for the family she'd built among the tribe and the life she'd known. Tragically, she died just a few years after her return, forever caught between two worlds. The memory of that fateful day lingered in her mind and remained a constant reminder of the love lost and the resilience she found within the face of unimaginable hardship. Warfare wasn't just a skill for the Comanche. It was their way of life. Raids weren't merely about plunder. They were displays of dominance and a way to earn respect within the tribe. Their mastery of psychological warfare, using fear as a weapon, likely shaped their attack strategy. Raids were swift and terrifying strikes, overwhelming and demoralizing the enemies. The reasons behind the Comanche raids were complex. They were driven by a desperate need to protect their way of life, a deeply ingrained warrior culture, and the ever-present need for horses, which was their key to survival on the unforgiving frontier. Forced by the growing conflict with settlers over land and buffalo herds, the true brutality of the Comanche raids unfolded under the full moonlight of the Comanche moon. There were other accounts of violence from survivors like Rachel, living a seemingly ordinary life at Fort Parker on the Texas frontier with her husband and young son. Rachel's world was violently shattered by a single raid led by hundreds of Comanche warriors. Confusion reigned as screams filled the air. Rachel watched helplessly as her husband ventured out to parley with the warriors, only to be murdered. The fort, meant to be a sanctuary, crumbled under the onslaught. Amidst the gunfire and flames, Rachel was separated from her screaming son and captured, forced on a grueling trek towards Comanche territory. Rachel's nightmare had just begun, leaving behind a life shattered and an uncertain future. There was also Sarah Miller, a survivor of the frontier raid, who was forever changed by the disruption of her life on the frontier. Sarah woke up to a blood-curdling scream. Panic surged as she looked outside, using the weak light of her lantern. Flames, whipped by the wind, devoured her neighbor's cabin, casting shadows on their own tent. The chilling war cries of the Comanche filled the air, a terrifying act of more violence to come. Warriors' faces were usually daubed with war paint. They moved with practiced efficiency. The pounding of hooves and the metallic clanging of blades became a horrifying sound at night. Smoke stung Sarah's eyes as she witnessed a scene of utter devastation. A young boy, barely a teenager, lay lifeless, an arrow piercing his chest. His mother held him close. Her cries for mercy were drowned out by the chaos happening around him. Captives' narratives only offer a glimpse into this brutal experience. Young Elnora, sharing the fear of those who hid during raids, found herself ripped from her family and taken away by the Comanche. Hunger, fear, and grueling tasks became her daily reality. Yet Elnora never gave up, imitating the resourcefulness of Sarah Thompson. She learned the Comanche language, gaining a grudging respect from some captors. William's story is another testament to human fortitude. A teenager thrown into a terrifying situation, he didn't succumb to despair. He adapted, becoming a skilled hunter. William's skill eventually earned him a measure of trust, showcasing the ability to find common ground even amidst captivity. These narratives of the survivor's account showed a clear display of strength. They not only survived unimaginable terror, but found ways to adapt, learning new skills, and even gaining a grudging respect from their captors. The ordeal may have been brutal, but it also revealed the immense strength of the human spirit to overcome even the most harrowing circumstances. Defending the American frontier against the Comanche was a daunting task for several reasons. First, the frontier stretched for hundreds of miles, with isolated settlements separated by long terrain. Patrolling such a massive area with limited manpower was nearly impossible. Imagine stretched-thin soldiers trying to guard a coastline thousands of miles long. Secondly, the Comanche were masters of horseback riding. They could strike quickly, cover immense distances in short periods, and vanish just as rapidly. It was like trying to hit a moving target the size of Texas. Unlike European armies with predictable formations, the Comanche attacked with hit-and-run tactics. Raids were swift, often under the cover of night, making it difficult to anticipate or respond effectively. Imagine a foe who disappears before dawn, leaving only screams and smoke behind. Another advantage the Comanche had was that communication in the frontier era was slow and unreliable. Messages about attacks could take days or even weeks to reach military outposts, rendering any response force obsolete by the time they arrived. It was like fighting a war in the age of carrier pigeons. The Comanche took advantage of the fact that the frontier settlements were often struggling. Supplying forts and soldiers with adequate food, ammunition, and horses to chase down the Comanche was a constant challenge. Imagine trying to fight a war with limited supplies and manpower. The Comanche weren't interested in conquering land. They sought horses, plunder, and disrupting settlement. This style of warfare made it difficult to achieve a decisive victory. It was like trying to extinguish a wildfire that keeps reigniting in unpredictable locations. These factors combined became a nightmare for frontier defense. The size of the land, the Comanche's mobility and tactics, and the limitations of communication and resources made it incredibly difficult to protect settlers from these elusive and highly skilled warriors. Fortifying communities and battling back on the frontier was difficult, but not impossible. Faced with constant threat, frontier communities adopted various methods to fortify themselves against Comanche raids. They started with blockhouses. These sturdy, elevated structures, built from logs, provided a central point of defense. Families could take refuge during attacks, firing rifles through strategically placed loopholes. Historical accounts, like the Journal of John Henry Brown, a Texas settler in 1848, often mentioned the life-saving role of blockhouses. Additionally, settlers formed local militias composed of able-bodied men who could respond quickly to raids. While not professional soldiers, these groups offered some level of armed resistance. However, their effectiveness was limited by factors like lack of training and coordination. As documented in the memoirs of Martha Jane Cannery, a Kansas frontier woman better known as Calamity Jane. Furthermore, communication networks were created and communities established warning systems like signal fires or horn blasts to alert neighbors of impending attacks. These crucial seconds allowed residents to reach the safety of blockhouses or hidden locations. The autobiography of frontiersman James Hobbs mentions the use of such communication methods in his Missouri community during the 1830s. Some ranchers constructed fortified ranches with high walls, lookout towers, and strategically placed rifle ports. These structures, like the well-known St. Mary's Ranch in Texas, offered a degree of protection for inhabitants, livestock, and supplies. In some instances, settlers sought alliances with more peaceful tribes like the Pawnee or Wichita. These alliances could provide valuable intelligence on Comanche movements and even scouting assistance. Despite these efforts, complete defense was nearly impossible. The greatness of the frontier and the Comanches' tactics made them a persistent threat. However, these measures provided some level of protection and a sense of community during a time of constant fear and uncertainty. The U.S. military played a significant role in attempting to curb Comanche raids on the American frontier. However, their efforts faced numerous challenges. These included limited manpower. The large expanse of the frontier stretched thin the available troops. Similar to the struggles of the Spanish against the Comanche, the U.S. military simply couldn't cover enough ground to effectively prevent raids. Also, a network of forts was established to serve as outposts for patrols and deter raids. However, these forts were often isolated and understaffed, limiting their effectiveness. The Comanches' hit-and-run tactics and superior horsemanship made them impossible targets for military campaigns. Troops struggled to engage in the Comanche in decisive battles, mirroring the frustration faced by the Spanish throughout their conflict. The U.S. military, accustomed to European-style warfare with set formations, wasn't well equipped to counter the Comanches' guerrilla tactics. Regularly supplying forts and soldiers stationed across the vast frontier with food, ammunition, and horses proved difficult and expensive. Policies of forced removal and broken treaties created resentment among the Comanche, fueling further conflict. Unlike the Spanish, who occasionally sought alliances with some tribes, the U.S. approach often created tension. Despite these challenges, the military did achieve some successes. Campaigns, like those led by General Ranald S. Mackenzie, weakened Comanche's power, forcing them onto reservations. However, these victories were often temporary, with renewed outbreaks of violence occurring throughout the 19th century. The involvement of the military in the Comanche Wars was a complex and often brutal affair. While they ultimately prevailed, the vastness of the frontier, the Comanches' skill as warriors, and a lack of understanding of their culture all contributed to a long and bloody conflict. The Comanche raids left a lasting impact on the development of the American West. The constant threat of raids discouraged many potential settlers from venturing west. This hindered the development of agriculture, towns, and infrastructure in the region. Imagine a farmer hesitant to plant crops, knowing they could be destroyed overnight. Settlers also tended to cluster in fortified communities for safety, hindering the spread of isolated farms and ranches. This clustered pattern of settlement contrasted with the more dispersed developments seen in other regions. Additionally, the need to address the Comanche threat led to an increased military presence on the frontier. This, in turn, shaped the development of towns like Dodge City, Kansas, which sprang up to cater to soldiers and supply forts. The conflict also fueled tensions and distrust between white settlers and Native American tribes. This atmosphere of suspicion made peaceful coexistence difficult and hampered efforts at diplomacy. There was also the environmental impact. The near extinction of the buffalo herds, a consequence of the Comanche raids on these animals for hides, had a devastating impact on the entire Great Plains ecosystem. Imagine a grassland stripped of its dominant grazers, leading to an ecological imbalance. Despite the violence, there was some cultural exchange between settlers and the Comanche. Captives like Cynthia Anne Parker assimilated into Comanche's life, blurring cultural lines. The Comanche raids weren't just about stolen cattle and horses. They were a major factor shaping the course of westward expansion. They slowed development, influenced settlement patterns, and left a legacy of distrust. The Comanche people have endured a complex and often contradictory portrayal throughout history. Early accounts by settlers often depicted the Comanche as bloodthirsty savages, solely focused on warfare and raiding. These portrayals, prompted by fear and misunderstanding, dominated popular culture for much of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Most Western movies often portrayed them as one-dimensional villain. In recent decades, historians and anthropologists have challenged these simplistic views. They went deeper into the Comanche way of life, recognizing their rich cultural traditions, complex social structures, and skilled horsemanship. This shift acknowledges their role as formidable warriors, but also explores their artistry, spiritual beliefs, and adaptation to the harsh realities of the Great Plains. Novels like Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynne explored the story of Cynthia Anne Parker, a white girl captured by the Comanche, and her son, Quanah Parker, a renowned Comanche leader. These works provide a more balanced perspective, showcasing the human stories and complexities on both sides of the conflict. Despite this progress, stereotypical portrayals of savage Indians persist in some popular media. Understanding the historical context of the Comanche Wars is crucial. They weren't simply aggressors. They were defending their land and way of life from encroachment by settlers. Recognizing these motivations will make us see things from both sides. Shifting perceptions of the Comanche people reflect a broader effort to move beyond simplistic narrative. By acknowledging their cultural richness, historical context, and the human stories behind the conflict, we gain a more nuanced understanding of this fascinating tribe. Remembering the complex period of the Comanche Wars isn't about glorifying violence or demonizing any one side. It's about understanding the struggles and experiences that shaped the American West. By examining the causes of the Comanche Wars, such as competition for resources and misunderstandings between cultures, we can learn valuable lessons about how to approach future conflict. Understanding the why behind the fighting allows us to seek peaceful solutions in similar situations. Remembering the human cost on both sides, the fear and loss experienced by settlers and Comanche alike, promotes empathy and respect for the experiences of others. It allows us to move beyond stereotypes and see the conflict through the eyes of those who lived it. Also, studying the broken treaties between the U.S. government and the Comanche highlights the importance of honoring agreements and respecting the rights of indigenous people. Learning from these historical failures can guide us toward building more trustworthy relationships in the future. Finally, remembering the Comanche people ensures that their rich cultural traditions, artistic expressions, and adaptation to the Great Plains environment aren't lost. It allows us to appreciate the diversity of human experience and the ingenuity of those who thrived in challenging settlements. The Comanche Wars are an integral part of American history. Remembering this period allows us to confront the complexities of our past and create a more inclusive narrative that acknowledges the experiences of all those involved in shaping the West. The past isn't always comfortable, but by studying it honestly, we gain valuable knowledge. Remembering the Comanche Wars allows us to learn from past mistakes, foster empathy, and appreciate the rich cultures that make up the American story. With survivors like Mary Morris hiding in fear and John Johnson witnessing the massacre of his family, these narratives highlight not just the violence, but the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Captivity narratives, like those of Eleanor and William, showcase the ability to adapt and even find respect amidst unimaginable hardship. Beyond the immediate terror, there were broader challenges faced by frontier communities. Long distances and the Comanche's mobility made defense a nightmare. Settlers resorted to building blockhouses, forming militias, and creating communication networks, all in a desperate attempt to protect themselves. The involvement of the U.S. military, while significant, was hampered by logistical issues and a lack of understanding of Comanche tactics. The long-term consequences of the raids were profound. Settlement slowed, with a shift towards fortified communities. The military presence left a lasting mark on the West. Perhaps most tragically, The near extinction of the buffalo herds had a devastating impact on the entire ecosystem. Moving beyond simplistic stereotypes, we gain a deeper understanding of the struggles on both sides. The Comanche weren't just bloodthirsty warriors. They were a people defending their way of life. Remembering their rich culture and the human cost of the conflict increases our empathy and allows us to learn valuable lessons about conflict resolution and honoring treaties. Ultimately, acknowledging the overlooked experiences of those who lived through the Comanche raids creates a complete understanding of the American West.